Good evening. How are you? We're doing a sit and talk today because we have tornado watch, and although the temperature, according to Thomas Jefferson, is 69, the conditions outside are wet uh, and rainy. And unlike some days, like yesterday, for example, when there was a big gap, I managed to get out, but that's not the weather today. The principal issue, I think, for the nation, and as the world watches us, is how dangerous is what's going on in Florida to the existence of our nation as a republic and as a democracy. In my opinion, Trump has basically called into question the safety and security of California, and without, in my opinion, the judicial authority or a presidential authority to himself order National Guard to a domestic situation in California, namely a protest against the way immigration laws are being enforced, scooping up and capturing people and treating them sort of like what we've seen dictatorships do in other nations. Now, for my authority, let's start with the following. The governor of the state, Newsom, who is the likely person who would call out for a National Guard if a demonstration was something that desired that, which is such disorder and such resurrection and so forth, that he thought it was necessary. He didn't think it was necessary. But the president, and I'll get to the law at the end of this, I suppose, because I think the facts are helpful to understand how the law doesn't measure up to an invocation of the National Guard by the president. A governor can call up the National Guard. Under certain circumstances, the president can call up the National Guard. This violates a long history in America in which we've been concerned, as we were with Great Britain at our founding, about being the subject of a military rule, junta, dictatorship, whatever. Now, Newsom says that the governor of California says that what Trump is really about is he's hoping for chaos. So he can justify more crackdowns, more fear, more control. Now, the second part of the governor's message, I'm not sure is correct in this sense. I don't think you can fight fire by being, as he said, stay calm, never use violence, be peaceful. Because my sense is even in that, you're saying that the demonstrators were violent and chose to be. Now, I'm not going to get into one of these language exchanges about if somebody did X, does that reflect the entire crowd? But we have as examples people who were injured in a way that just shouldn't happen either to a news person or to a protester. Nick Stern, for example, is a British photographer, and I found reference to him in a Guardian article, which I have not found in our, quote, domestic newspapers. And he was near Home Depot and Paramount, and he was struck by what he felt was a non-lethal round because he's had experience covering the news in difficult places. It turned out he had a 5-centimeter hole and his muscle was hanging out, and there was blood up and down his leg. This is what happened to one person who was there taking pictures. So was it an irresponsible shooting of non-lethal rounds just into the crowd? And that's what it sounds like. I'm sure in the days ahead, this will unfold. And it'll be important that it unfolds because I think if I were in the situation of the governor, we would be in court declaring the declaration of a need for the National Guard to be unsupported by the law or the facts. Now, Democratic Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett said, this is what authoritarian looks like. And I couldn't agree more with her. And this is what we have feared going along. And the question is, when is this going to go off the rails and become something worse than just a, quote, era of fact and law terrifying so many people, in this case, in segments of California? Now, you have to consider how Trump could have acted so quickly. And I suspect what he's been doing is he's been testing the ability of protesters to avoid the provocations so that they would have, if you will, a pretense to do exactly what they're doing now. But there are, and we'll see if they've happened, there are supposed to be statements, resolutions that justify the action by the president. So Trump quickly, seemingly, because he had the hope to provoke opposition, was in a place to call out the troops, which, as you can imagine, is could this have happened so quickly on January the 6th if it could happen yesterday? I think not. See, I think that this was scheduled, and January 6th was scheduled another way, but the troops were not called quickly enough because the president didn't want them to be there. This is the hypocrisy of our current state of affairs in America. This is our state of affairs when we're enforcing these immigration laws, I think, as a first step to bring us to a different place. Now, I'm a child of the 60s, and I feel I've seen things like this, but nothing worse than Trump's illegal Bulgarian escapades. Koala Lindy Elliman, who is a demonstrator, and I found her in the BBC. She was in a report there. She said she'd only protested to stop the arrest. She's talking about the immigration people arresting people on pretext or canceling their papers when they don't know it and they're at a place, say, for a check-in, and then they do their business and creates terror and scary and everything else. And all calculated to have somebody say, hey, you, and push back, to say, stop it, don't do that. You can't do that. I was at Columbia University, now many years ago, at a time when there were demonstrations, and they called it a student riot. Instead, it really was a police riot. And students, myself included, I was then undergraduate at the engineering school, and then I went to the School of Law at the same campus. There were a line of police telling us if we just stayed where we were, we would be okay. At that same time, they were literally pulling students out of buildings and dragging them across the many steps in front of a place, which is the Law Library, which is a center of administrative responsibility and formal occasions. And somebody near me apparently got upset, and it was like somebody hit him, and then all of a sudden there was a little bit of chaos, and the police started charging the crowd that they said would be okay. A fellow I knew from the wrestling team literally picked up a wooden board from one of those wooden horses and hit a policeman on horseback, and it tossed back. And then it was just all chaos. What am I saying? Am I saying this is like that? I'm saying that it feels like that, it sounds like that, it is that. This is what we have to be afraid of. And everybody just sort of hoping it's going to go along. This is what happens in abused relationships. This is the S&M of politics. For these guys to cause punishment and for us to put up with it. We can't do that. So when Koali Linda Elliman was talking about her experiences at the protest, she said there were helicopters overhead. There were hundreds of police on the ground, and they started spraying tear gas. Does that sound like something that will provoke the people? Now, she said she expected to protest again today, Sunday. If I can find a further comment on her experience, I'll let you know about it. There were arrests, but what were the arrests for? Misdemeanor charges for failing to disperse. In other words, an officer, say, get the hell out of here, and you don't. So I arrest you for it on a misdemeanor. This is what the SS did. This is what they're doing. That is our own government supposedly representing us. So let's talk about what is the law a little bit here, because it's amazing to me that the people speaking outside of Newsom do not talk about the requirements for invoking, a law by the by force, bringing in National Guard. Now, under Title 10 of the United States Code, it's the Insurrection Act of, get the year, 1807. And for those of you who like to look these things up, if you go to Title 10, U.S. Code, sections 50 and following, you'll get the law. Now, I printed out a couple of these things because I'd like to not approximate what the law says, but tell you what it says. So in section 251 of Title 10, the first of the several sections that apply, it says the state can make a request for National Guard under certain circumstances. And then you would go to the governor first, or the governor would say, I need help here. Let's have the National Guard. State did not do that. That's what Newsom complains about. I've looked at the facts. The officers on the ground didn't think it was necessary either. Section 252 talks about the use of militia and armed forces to enforce federal authority. And it says, whenever the president, as opposed to the state, considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it, and here's the word, impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. We don't have a rebellion, we have a protest. Enforcing the laws, as I indicated to you, the only law, as I know it, as I'm talking to you right now, is disperse, and they didn't. They were demonstrating, they're told to disperse. In other words, don't tell the world what's going on here that you object to. Don't use your First Amendment right of access to public media to tell the world what's going on here. We're going to make what you're doing, which is an exercise of free speech, we're going to make it an offense, we're going to call it a misdemeanor, and tomorrow or the next day, after you've been in jail and after we pushed you around and after you've had spray in your eyes and discouraged you from protesting the next time, well, we'll do it the next time. That's what we'll do. And sooner or later, you guys are going to get so annoyed. There are going to be so many people. You're going to be so upset about it that maybe we really do need the armed forces to put you down. And why are we putting you down? We're putting you down because you, the people, are resisting unauthorized, injudicious exercise of pure power, not supported by law or authority or practice in the history of the United States. Now, we have had people in the past, we have had instances, but to come up with, even with this bogus charge, only 29 arrests when you claim a crowd as being so terrible, there's something rotten in Denmark there. Sorry, Denmark, I couldn't help but avoid it. Now, Section 253 goes into under what circumstances Trump could, or any president could, call in the National Guard. And it says, any insurrection. This is not an insurrection, it's a protest. It's not domestic violence. They were protesting, they were gassed, and then you guys go in and beat them up and put them in a paddy wagon. Unlawful combination or conspiracy. There's no terrorist conspiracy here. If there's a conspiracy, it is among those forces, those fascistic forces that would suppress opposition to the unlawful treatment so far of migrants. In the future, you can expect a lot more, you and me. That's what's going to happen here. And when you have those situations, they have to so hinder the executions of the laws of that state and of the United States. And that's not happening. And any part of its... Now, the interesting thing is that if any part or class of the people of a state are deprived of right, privilege, immunity, or protection, that could be a cause. That's the interesting identity crisis. Our government should be pointing at itself. Our government is the one who is suppressing individual rights and liberties and the immunity that individuals have under the First Amendment to assert their ability to speak and protest about what's going on. It's bad enough that we can't get a fair day in court. It's bad enough that we can't get a Supreme Court to recognize the law of the land and actually, by not doing anything, to make it worse. Do no harm is what we say about doctors. These people are so far past that concern. And what feeds them? Hate, bigotry. You're not white. You're not male. We don't care if you've been working here for 20 years. We don't even care if we get the facts right. We just eliminated all of the paperwork by which you could legally be here, and then we can push you out any way we want because you're whatever. It's, the history of America, whether it be Native Americans or the Spanish or the French or the Irish or the Italian or the Jews, have had this history through every generation. And that's what they're doing to us here and now. So the bottom line is The president has been looking for an opportunity to do the martial law that he didn't do, but thought to do in the first administration before January 6th. Another example of that's a true insurrection. That's what an insurrection looks like. You want to compare anything that happens in America now for purposes of enforcement by a military force? Look at what happened on January the 6th. And if that's an insurrection, we don't have an insurrection. Nobody's going into the government buildings and so forth. What we are doing is we're going into buildings and taking civilians who believe they're legitimately here, but haven't been told yet that their papers have been thrown out, and they want to spirit them out of America before they can go to a courtroom and have anybody challenge the legitimacy of their seizure and their prevention from staying here because they're a migrant of some sort or other. America's at a crossroads. There is no question about it. You keep waiting and you keep wondering why somebody doesn't take a frying pan and hit them in the head, because what they're doing is not their job. What they're doing is cowering and retreating. And I'm so sick of their talk. Is there no force in America to stop this? Because if we don't stop it, we will no longer be a republic. We will not have a voice. And I think Trump would be just fine and dandy if we were all slaves, had no choices except to accept the crumbs from these people as they take first from the poor and then from the middle class, the funds and the power, and give it to the rich. And the history of arrangements like that is when Trump doesn't need the rich anymore. Why don't you ask Musk? When they don't need the rich anymore, they'll discard them too, as has been the case in every other dictatorship in the history of the world. So, I don't know if you find this reassuring. I didn't get a chance to spend the energy on the trail, so I spent it here. My wife Holly and I did get a chance to go out to look at the masterworks of a local sculptor who is, if not world renowned, he should be. And we've known him for years, and he's done marvelous statues. And I'll put up a picture of something with my feed in which I reference the link to this video. So I hope you have a good day. Be careful about the weather. And with any luck, I'll be talking to you tomorrow without rain. All the best. Bye-bye.